Hello and welcome to Indies on Indie. I'm your host, Patrick Poe, and this is my podcast, Indies on Indie. Welcome. I assume that some of you are new. Some of you, I probably have the most Australians ever listening to this episode, so welcome to my podcast. I'll give you kind of an overview. So this is it. I talk to artists and creators of all sorts, but mostly filmmakers, and we talk about why they do what they do, some of the struggles they've gone through, some of the successes they've had, and I hope that people are inspired and learn from those moments. So, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for listening. At the beginning here, I kind of usually talk about what I've been up to, what I've been working on, and it's not too much. I don't have a lot to talk about today. So we'll get to this episode pretty quick, which is exciting because I'm very excited about this episode. The one thing I've kind of been doing is I have a TikTok now. I'm at the Patrick Poe, which is what I am on all social media. But yeah, now I'm at the Patrick Poe on TikTok. And I've been texting some of my friends that I'm on TikTok, and they're like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm okay. I might have lost my mind because I'm doing this thing now." And I don't know if that's a sign of me being creatively inspired to do something, or if it's a sign of full insanity. So you can decide that. You can go to my TikTok and decide that, or you can just decide that from the fact that I'm on TikTok now and I've been posting daily, and I now care about whether or not people see my 1 minute nonsense. So that's what I've been up to. We've also got new sound gear, which you'll kind of hear about at the beginning of this episode because I was struggling with it. I'm very excited about it, though. It's hopefully going to increase the possibilities of not only this podcast, but my podcast I have with my wife, my partner, the most amazing person in the world, Lolo Loren, First Timers Movie Club. So hopefully that'll open up some opportunities and some other things for both of those podcasts. Maybe open up the idea to have some more guests or to have guests on First Timers Movie Club once this crazy pandemic stops ruining everything. Was that too dark? I hope that wasn't too dark. Oh, well. Oh, man. But today's guest, I guess we'll just get on to that because that's what I want to talk about. Today's guest is actually our first guest that I'd never met before the interview. Well, no, I guess I've had that also. This is the first guest that isn't really like a Kansas City person, or I don't know. That's not true either. Okay, well, this is the first person that had to be remote because of their location. That's how it works. Yeah. We've had other people contact us about being on Indies on Indie in the past 5 years of this podcast existing. And it used to be a show where we sat in my basement and we discussed art. And then the pandemic hit and the podcast went virtual. And I was really reluctant to go that way for a very long time. And the podcast really went on hiatus for a long time. And after a long, long hiatus, the podcast went virtual. And that's actually opened up to having interviews like this. And I'm so glad we had this interview. I absolutely love the person I talked with. He is an amazing guy, and I'm so glad I got to meet him. And I am glad that I'm not as reluctant to doing something different and new anymore as I was 5 years ago. Because there are other people that could have been amazing that I could have probably met. And I don't know. Now, I'll probably meet them at some point, maybe, but who knows? But I'm glad that I met today's guest, and he was a perfect guest to have as our first totally remote guest, I guess. I was so glad to talk with him and figure out the time difference with him because he's an Australian filmmaker, which I think is very interesting. He has a different perspective on experiences in filmmaking than many of the Americans that we talk to on this podcast, which is, I guess, everybody else besides our guest today. I also found it really fun how quickly I realized listening back to this episode, I was to pick up not slang, but terms that he was using and start using them. So like you'll notice in the episode, he starts using the term cinema, which I think in this episode I say more times than I've ever said cinema in my life, maybe. I definitely don't use it generally when thinking about a movie theater. I don't say I'm going to the cinema, but in this episode I do, because he was using it first and then I just followed along, and I like it. It sounds important. So maybe I'll start saying cinema more often. Who knows? I will take this opportunity to remind you to subscribe to the podcast. Please like, review, rate, all of those wonderful things that help people get to know the podcast better and get more people to find the podcast. We also have our Patreon, patreon.com/IXFilmProductions, if you want to support any of the cool stuff we're doing over here at IX Film Productions. All right, so we're about to get to the interview. I'm excited for this. Like I said, he's really cool. He made a short film called Brolga that he sent me, and it was beautiful, and I was so impressed by it. And then I watched a bunch of his other films, and we talk about all of that in this episode, so I'll let you hear that here in a second. I'll also say you've got to listen to the end of it, because near the end, like the last 10 minutes, he kind of blows a theory of mine out of the water and totally reframes my thinking on a thing, and I'll still probably believe my thing, but his thing is also true. So that's really fun to hear. All right, let's get to the guest, though. He is a writer, he's a director, he's an editor, he's worked on all sorts of films. He's got an upcoming TV series that he was a writer on coming out on Netflix soon. Here is me and Adrian Powers.
Okay, it says you're connected. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. We're alive.
I was having a really weird sound issue. Sorry about that.
No, totally fine. And this is like the first time I've tried this headphone mic setup on a Zoom. I only bought it like last week. So I was like, oh, are we having glitches? I don't know, but we're alive.
That's okay. Yeah, I was even late to join this meeting because I just bought a new soundboard for this podcast.
Oh, cool.
And so in that setup, I was like, I don't know how to record. Like, I literally don't know how to hit the button to record audio. So I learned that.
We've both learned so much today already. I love it.
And now I'm trying to figure out, there we go, full screen. Oh, beautiful. Awesome. Wonderful. How are you doing today?
Very, very well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I had to work at my regular job because I still have one of those. So that sucked.
Lucky.
But
yeah, I get that.
But now I'm here talking to you. So it's a better time of my day then.
That's very nice of you to say. Obviously for me, the day is really only kind of kicking off. So it's after this, it could get bad, but so far pretty good.
Yeah, because so it's morning right now, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it's 11:35.
Wow.
In the morning, and I've got, I've got a bunch of meetings this afternoon, and then, the inauguration tomorrow. There's just so many, things on the calendar right now that are like, oh God, I don't want to miss that. So
are you concerned about our inauguration then, or is that
in terms of safety issues or possible things that could transpire? Nah, I think it's going to be okay. Me
too. I think it'll be fine. I hope he gives a nice speech and it just goes fine,
Yep, I think it's going to go okay.
I think it will too, but
based on all of the, inverted commas, attacks on the other capitals, which was like, oh, that kind of fizzled out. I don't think we got anything to worry about.
Yeah, me either.
Crossed. Let's hope this doesn't age poorly.
Yeah, this will come out Friday, so it'll have happened.
Yeah, cool. Guys, don't at me if this goes really badly.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting no caller. Go away. Worst possible time to get what is clearly a marketing call.
That happens like 20 times a day to me, so I understand.
Yeah, muted.
Oh man, wonderful. I'm so glad to talk with you. I watched a lot of your work today, and that was really...
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no, it was really exciting. I watched, oh man, I'm forgetting how to say it. Brolga.
Yep.
And I was really impressed. It's gorgeous.
Thank you so much.
I've watched
It's really nice of you to say. Thank you.
I mean, I've watched a lot of really bad indie films, so it's always nice when you see a gorgeous one.
That's very nice. Thank you.
I've even made
appreciate
some
that.
really bad indie films, so
Me too.
So we'll start at the beginning, I guess. When did you decide that filmmaking was the thing?
I've thought about that like a couple of times throughout my life. Like I've always been absolutely, obsessed with movies. It's the same old story, that like, raised on movies and live and breathe movies and TV, et cetera, et cetera. But even though it was like a huge passion of mine, it didn't actually occur to me to go to film school until I was like 22. I was like the manager of a EB Games when I was like 22. And one of my colleagues who was older than me and had gone to film school was like, you should go to film school and study film. And it was just like, ding. I felt really stupid for not having thought of that before. And I was like, wow, I really got close to not even thinking of that. And so I quit that job and then went to film school and have just been making a go of it ever since.
Wow. So like it was literally just somebody else was like, that's what you should do?
It's really that simple. And like I said, I feel it's one of those things which is so obvious, given that if you'd known me even before that, like I just lived and breathed cinema and was, when I was a kid, I remember like my grandfather would sit down and go like, how can you watch the same movie more than once in a day? And I would be watching like, like The Lion King and stuff like that, like 3 or 4 times a day when I was like a wee kid, just because I was like, oh man, I just love this so much. And yet it never, I even made, little home movies or like little things with friends, like just messing around with home cameras and stuff like that. And I'd already been, I'd already even done like basic video editing with like Windows Movie Maker and stuff like that. So it just feels like I just felt so moronic when someone was like, you should really just do that as a job. I went, it was like a complete revelation. I was like, you're right. So yeah,
that's incredible. That's a great little story. I do wonder in Sydney, when you decided like, oh, I'm going to film school, is there a clear track that you could see to like success in the film industry?
Well, I mean, a clear track to success is something else. But there are working. A lot. Yeah, exactly. Like there are, luckily, Sydney, I mean, and again, we have to say this within the context of our times, because right now, given the, the state of the world, it's a hard time for everyone. Even though Australia is very lucky with the COVID situation, we actually do have a lot of productions now, like a lot of American productions that are here shooting because it's relatively safe and there's, you can actually get stuff done.
Yeah.
But that being said, like your indie scene and your small time filmmakers are struggling as much as they are anywhere else because comparatively not much is going on. But that being said, in the best of times, Sydney does have a really great film industry. We've got Fox Studios here, which is where they shot The Matrix and where they shot the Star Wars prequels. And, they're shooting, what is it? Shang-Chi, the new Marvel movie has been shooting there. And so, and there's a bunch of film school here and film study facilities here, but, like anywhere else, there's some of them are great and some of them are a little bit more, like, okay, this is more of a film course than a film school. But I went and studied at a place called the International Film School in Sydney, which is now the Australian,
it's
AFTT changed names.
Now
or AFTT.
Something. Yeah.
That's right. But it's still a lot of the same folks that are there. And that was a really great school to go to because they taught a really holistic style of filmmaking there. They were like, if you want to be good at filmmaking, you've got to learn and understand the nature of all the different roles and departments at the very least, so that you know how to communicate and how to appreciate what that position is. And so unlike some other film schools, and certainly maybe some other film schools, even in Australia, which really favor a strong like disciplinary track, like if you're studying directing, you study directing. If you're studying writing, you writing, and then you don't flirt with any of the other things. IFSS / AFTT really encourage like, hey, you write a movie, you're directing movies. And we I directed, I think, maybe 6 short films in the 2 years that I was there, which is fantastic compared to a lot of other film schools all over the world. But not only that, I assistant directed on a bunch of movies. I did sound on a bunch of movies. I edited a bunch of movies, produced a bunch of movies, because it was a small group, maybe 30 students to a tier, to a year of students, and you would all just cycle around on each other's projects
That's
and help each
awesome.
other out and learn all the different. It was so great, and it was thanks to that when I was there that I made a short film that got enough recognition to kind of get me a foothold in the feature world.
That's incredible. So I'll just say, because I'm dumb, I've never been to Australia. So my dumb, like, Australian views as opposed to like American. So in my mind, Australia is much smaller. And so it seems more, which you were already stationed in Sydney, you were already in Sydney, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like
it's
less difficult to get to Sydney, I'm guessing, than like in America. Just the idea of like, I live in the Midwest, so getting to New York or getting to LA is its own like Herculean journey.
Totally. And having traveled across the US, I get that. So it's funnily enough, like the landmass of Australia, like the continent, is actually kind of the equivalent size of the United States, if not maybe a little bit more. It's actually, it's crazy because we don't remotely think of it that way. And just to be clear, like even we in Australia, we don't think of it being that way at all. We're a tiny country compared to the US, but in terms of the landmass, it's kind of the same. You can do those comparative things where they just put a map on top of the other country and it's like, oh my God. But the thing about it is, comparatively, way less of it is populated.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is like desert and really kind of inhospitable to your general folk. There's still plenty of people that do live way out remotely, and there's lots of cities and towns and communities out there. But generally speaking, it's the coastlines that are occupied, and it's really the East Coast, which is the most occupied. So you've got, Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne and all the major countries are all just kind of down the East Coast, which is this kind of green strip that goes down the East Coast. And even though Sydney is not the capital of Australia, Canberra is. The only reason Canberra exists is because Melbourne and Sydney couldn't agree who the capital was going to be. So they struck a deal to make a third little kind of satellite city to be the capital. And Melbournians are going to hate me when I say this, but Sydney's kind of the center of Australia. It's where it's all at.
I mean, that's what I thought. But
people from Melbourne will be like, they'll call me swine for saying that. Just kidding. I love Melbourne too. I love all Australia.
Oh man. So so I definitely think that like being in Sydney, where it does have such a thriving scene, had to be incredible as a growing filmmaker.
Yeah, that was totally correct. Like that was a huge part of it for me, because growing up, so I'm, 35 now. So when I was 13, they were shooting Star Wars and The Matrix, Wolverine and all this, that were all shooting.
That's crazy.
Literally 20 minutes away from where I lived. And admittedly, it's in like a lot of that stuff, maybe like Star Wars and whatnot, that's all on sound stages. No one can get access to it. But The Matrix, like you've seen The Matrix, like a lot of that movie just takes place in the city. And Sydney especially is super protective of the movie The Matrix. Like we think of it almost like an Australian movie because it was shot here with an Australian crew on our sound stages and all throughout the city. So it's funny, people watch The Matrix, and I've spoken to people about this, especially when I've been traveling overseas, and they go like, oh, the aesthetic of that movie is so great. But to Australians watching it, it's almost funny because it's literally, like that's just down the road from everyone in Sydney knows all the locations that are in The Matrix, every single shot.
That's so crazy.
We chuckle when we see it because it's like, oh, well, I work there or I went to school there or whatever. And it's a real trip. So there is like a really and that's to say nothing of all the really rich history of Australian films, genuinely produced Australian films that go back decades here.
That's so funny because like watching The Matrix personally, I think it's like it looks so aesthetically interesting because it isn't New York, Chicago, LA.
Exactly.
And you can tell, but I never put together what city they did film it in. And that's so funny.
Exactly. It was all shot here. And, the second movie, they shot a little bit in San Francisco, but it in a funny way, not in a genuine way, but in a sweet way. Now that they're doing another Matrix movie, they're shooting a fourth one, and it's predominantly being shot, I think, in San Diego and a lot of it in Berlin, I think. And Australians are just like, what do you mean? Sydney's the home of the Matrix. Like, you can't go to a different city and shoot the Matrix. It's an outrage. So, it's kind of a bummer. But yeah, those three movies especially are super, I love all three of those Matrix films, but the first one especially is really beloved by the Aussie film industry.
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't know that. And like, obviously you've got the history with like Mad Max and all of those films.
Totally. And, the Australian film industry, it's funny, people don't know this either, but Australia actually produced the very first feature film was made in Australia by Australians about Ned Kelly, our, the famous bush ranger character, who's kind of a, I guess you'd kind of call him like in a weird way, like maybe like a Jesse James of Australian kind of guy. And, they did a movie about him with Heath Ledger a couple of years, or, about 15, 20 years ago. And the very first feature film was made about Ned Kelly in Melbourne back in 1906 or something like that, back when a bunch of guys that were just film entrepreneurs at the time with this new technology, which had previously only been used for like short little films and little 5-minute Nickelodeon things in, little tents and stuff. They were like, what if we just make something that goes for like the length of a play? And that was where kind of feature filmmaking was kind of born in Melbourne, which is amazing. But
that's crazy.
It's really crazy, and it astonishes people when they learn that, but it's absolutely true. But that being said, the Australian film industry didn't really kind of kick off really genuinely in earnest until kind of the 1970s. And after that, we've really started to steamroll and get our own kind of cinematic identity here in Australia.
Yeah, that's awesome. So personally, you went to school at what is now AFTT.
Correct.
Sorry, I didn't write down the other name, but I have AFTT written on my little...
I'm so embarrassed. Like, I'm going to look it up right now because they're going to be so bummed at me if I'm on here and they're like, what do you mean you didn't say the full name of the institution? The Academy of Film, Theatre and Television.
Okay.
Look it up, guys. It's a great school.
I like that they don't have like a name, or it's just the Academy of Film, Theatre and Television, just period. Like... That's what they
right.
are.
And I think they kind of go by the Australian Academy of Film, Theatre and Television. But if you're in Sydney and you want to go to a great film school, check them out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like, that sounds like an incredible way to learn. And that's very much like
so good.
What I've done just in the indie area in Kansas City is we all need crew. So obviously we're all going to crew on each other's things and we're going to direct our thing. And like, that is, I think, the best way to learn.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And, like, there's always there's a big debate about people go like, is film school versus not going to film school? Like in the case is basically, do you go to film school or do you just learn through the school of hard knocks and try to get on set and learn that way? And honestly, the best thing to do is to combine those two things and go to a place where you can discuss the theory and the intellectualism and the conceptual stuff behind film. But the most important stuff is to go out and make films. You've just got to get on set and get cameras and get equipment and learn all the mistakes. And so if you can go to a school like I did, and again, not every school's like this. I mean, there are other schools even in this city where, sometimes it's a lottery as to who gets to make a movie. You have to kind of make a pitch and you only get to direct off the back of the strength of your pitch. And I understand that it's good to have, it's good to be competitive kind of in that way, but giving everyone the chance to make a movie and have them all learn and grow together is not only, I think, a better experience, but it just forges everyone together. Like I'm still friends with a lot of those people from film school, even though it's now like 10 years since I've graduated. So
yeah, no, that's definitely
the way to go.
Been a large talking point on this podcast is film school versus School of Hard Knocks.
Totally.
And as a person that grew up in School of Hard Knocks, I think I agree that it's a combination, but I've definitely seen people on set that are like, I just graduated film school. And you're like, all right, cool, get me this thing. And they don't know what you're talking about.
100%. Yeah. And that happens so often all over the world, right? Where, like I said, it's kind of, you maybe go to have more of a film studies course. And I've done that as well, right? Like I went to university before I went to film school and studied a lot of film stuff there. And that was really great. But, that was that scenario where you're so intellectualizing some of these films, and sometimes it's great fun to do that, to look at a film and let's really kind of go over the top with overanalyzing every shot and what does that mean and what's the subtext behind that. But at the same time, like when you actually get into the process of filmmaking, you really do find out most filmmakers would be like, that I don't know what you're talking about, that's completely unintentional, you're just looking into that way too much, we just wanted to get the film made and out the door. So, but
Yeah.
it's fun to dig into it too much sometimes.
And while you were there, I'm guessing that writing, directing was always kind of your personal focus, but did you know that editing was a thing that you were good at, that you were leaning towards in any way? Or
it's funny, right? Like, as I said before, I had already been experimenting with and that's why, I'm going to use this opportunity. Whoever's out there, whoever was on the Microsoft like Windows dev team in like 2001, whoever it was like, let's just put a rudimentary video editing software included which allowed me as a teenager to just start like playing around with editing. And I realize now so much that was such an important foundational experience for me. Just like, it's the exact same thing as, when you hear filmmakers from a certain generation saying how they were playing with their Super 8 cameras when they were little. This was the same thing, where it's just experimenting with nonlinear editing digitally as a kid. It was a really incredible experience. But having played around with that, I did know that I had a love and a passion for editing. But that kind of segues into my kind of general philosophy about filmmaking, which is that for me personally, it's not necessarily true of everyone, but for me personally, I classify myself as a filmmaker. I like writing, I like directing, I like editing, and in some instances, I like doing all of them at once, or maybe one or the other, or just one for someone else. I think those different fields scratch different itches creatively, and I really enjoy all three of them.
If I could quit editing for the rest of my life, I would. Like, oh no, I think I lost your signal.
Look, I hear you. Like, my bread and butter work. Oh, did you? Am I back?
I didn't. You're back now.
Oh, thank God. Okay, yeah. Don't hesitate to let me know. Where did I leave off?
I was just telling you I hate editing, and then you disappeared, and I was like, oh no.
Right. I just burst into laughter because I was like, I feel your pain. But like, my bread and butter, my regular kind of day job is working as a video editor.
Yeah.
I still get a great deal of satisfaction from doing good, editorial, a job well done. But I feel your pain.
It's like what I have to do so that I can get the things I wrote and directed and acted in out into the world. It's like
totally. But there are just times when I go, at the same time, I could be. Well, I was trying to think of a job that was less desirable, but then I don't want to insult anyone in that job. I guess I'm just saying. At least I say to myself, at least we're lucky we're still working in the field, right?
Oh,
we're
definitely.
Working with video entertainment and content, and in the field. At least it's in the industry, and we don't have to, and shuffle off and do something we loathe.
My wife feels the same way you do. That she would keep, like, if she became the biggest filmmaker of all time tomorrow, she'd probably still edit. Like,
totally.
And she would steal the computer from, if there was another editor working on it, she would micromanage it till the point she takes it from them. Like,
well, look at Steven Soderbergh, right? I mean, like, I had the wonderful privilege of when Steven Soderbergh was in Sydney and he was giving a talk, and I went along to it because I love his work, and he's just such an amazing filmmaker. And he was just talking about how he gets so much satisfaction from doing other roles, not just on his own films, but for other people. So he was saying how, he always uses these pseudonyms, but the amount of times that, Steven Soderbergh has gone in and re-edited someone else's movie for them, or worked as a cinematographer for them, or, in the case of, the sequel to, what was the stripping film that he did? The name escapes me, with Channing Tatum.
Oh, Magic Mike.
Magic Mike, the sequel to Magic Mike. He was talking about Magic Mike when he was doing this speech, and he was saying, so I think we're going to do a sequel, and I'm going to write it and shoot it, and I'm going to have the AD of the first one direct it.
Mm.
So just imagine shooting a film and then going to your AD, okay, you make the next one and then I'll work for you. And that's Steven Soderbergh. And I'm just like, that's such an incredible attitude. He just loves doing these different roles and wearing these different hats. And I get that, because having edited, like 15 feature-length movies now, and having, directed others and written others, sometimes it's really great just to have a director who you're trying to make their vision come together, and then you get satisfaction from their satisfaction, or you get satisfaction from making something together that you didn't have to necessarily lose blood, sweat, and tears over, like, it's just like, great, the director's going to be shepherding the huge burden of this project, but I can really work with the artistry and the technical side of it to help that to come to life. And I find that really satisfying in its own right.
I mean, that's definitely my favorite quote from, did you see The Disaster Artist?
Oh man.
When they talk
Course,
about
absolutely.
like the worst day working on a film is still better than the best day
exactly right.
doing
so
anything
right.
else. I really
Exactly
feel
right.
that.
I totally agree. And you're so right. And when I saw that film and that line came up, and I've just remembered it now as you've said it, I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that's so true. It's also cool though, as like an editor, you kind of have like a film. I always say a film's made 3 times. It's made in the writing process, it's made in the directing, and then you're the last person making that film as the editor. And that's such an important role that I think a lot of people forget about.
Yep. Sadly true. Sadly true. They say like the best editing is you're not supposed to notice it. No one's supposed to see it. It's a fascinating thing, right? And it's something which is so incredibly revered and respected. It's so revered and respected inside the film industry.
Yeah.
And completely unknown, really, to a great extent, outside the film industry. It can be tough sometimes when you just want to have a little bit of kudos, maybe just from the average punter. Like I know that every time a film that I've edited has had a review where the editing has been mentioned, I go, are they supposed to mention the editing? Is that a violation of the principle? No, give me the kudos. I want it.
I mean, I think score is a similar thing that like I've never really paid attention to score. And then when I do go, oh, that score is really nice, I then think, is there something else that's not as good that I'm paying attention to the score that much? Or is the score really like,
that's
and I get
such a great
like...
call. 100%. Or in my case, I'm like, that's such great score. And then suddenly you go, wait a minute. Why is there music happening during this scene? For me, like the whole like artifice of cinema like breaks down. It's like, oh, this is ridiculous and manipulative. But I know that a lot of the composers I've worked with, they get the benefit of being able to put their work out separately as its own little piece of art. They can put the score out. Like in the case of Brolga, my film, Matt Ruddick, the composer, who's a wonderful composer, who's a genius, did a wonderful job on the film. The score has now been released on all the major streaming services, and that's just been released on its own. And I've been now, I don't want to sound self-indulgent, but now, when I've been walking the dogs or whatever, I'm like, maybe I'll just, for the first time, just listen to the score really just on its own and through, streaming it on iTunes or whatever. It's like, that's so good. It's so beautiful. And and he's so lucky that he can just have that as a separate piece, and he's getting different people going, oh, I love this bit and I love this bit. And it's totally independent from the movie.
And it feels so different
that.
Listening to it as its own piece than experiencing it as part of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's get into like the movies you've made. You've made a bunch of films.
Been lucky enough to be involved in a couple of movies.
Yeah, I watched a lot of them actually. And before we get into like all the ones I know you want to talk about, I want to talk about how much I loved Monuments.
Oh, that's really nice of you to say. Thank you.
Like it, as a camera like geek and just like as a filmmaker myself, it just was so simple, and I totally was like, I understand those people, and I loved it.
Right?
Like,
that's really nice of you to say. Thank you. I'm glad that movie's. It's funny you say it because that movie's kind of getting a second renaissance now. It's I made that movie like 10 years ago now. It was my first film school film, and I only recently found out in terms of, the YouTube algorithm that if you put hashtags in your video description, you're going to get more distribution. And I was like, oh, maybe I should do that to my old films. And I started hashtagging up. And then suddenly Monuments has been getting more tick over and views. I'm like, yay, people giving that movie a bit of love. Thanks, guys.
It deserves it. It's a really like...
That's really nice. Thanks, man.
Yeah, definitely. And then I watched Scruples. I watched the trailer for Battleground, which had to have been a crazy experience.
Dude. We could do like a whole podcast season about like maybe I should just do that. Maybe I should just start a podcast which is like, we're just going to chronicle the making of this movie. Other people have done that.
Yeah.
That movie was insane.
How did you end up as a co-director on that film? Because it seems like, just looking at the credits, that lead actor it was like his like passion project because he's the
Mhm.
lead. I think he wrote it, he co-directed it, and produced
And
it, right?
produced it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually co-wrote the movie as well. But yeah, so you're talking about Johan Earl, who is a great buddy of mine, and Johan is actually in Scruples, my short film. So my one of my film school short Scruples, I met
He
Johan on it as the
is.
actor. It's the same guy.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. Thank you for putting that together in my brain.
Yeah, yeah, that's the same guy. It's incredible. He does quite a transformation. Yeah, so I met Johan to. It's actually funny. On my first day of film school, on orientation day, in the cinema at the film school, they did this little presentation that showed off a bunch of the current students' work, like a little sizzle reel that just kind of showed what they were working on. And there was one shot that I thought was really incredible. And it was a film that had this guy in it with this incredibly intense expression. And I was like, wow, that looks really cool. And then later on, I was like, what was that film? Can I get a look at that film? And they screened it afterwards. And I really apologize to the filmmaker because I can't remember what the name of the film was, but it had Johan in it. And I was like, this guy's incredible. And the head of the school, Duncan Thompson, was talking to me and he's like, yeah, he's actually an armorer. He works, with film set weaponry, but he's also an actor. I was like, wow. And he goes, yeah. And he's kind of good bang for your buck, right? Because if you want to have a great actor and have, an armorer on set, he comes together. So I was like, wow. And anyway, about a year later, I was writing Scruples and I was like, you know what? I really think that guy would be great for this role. And I got in touch with him and I said, like, look, I would love for you to be involved in this. Not just as an armorer, even though there's definitely a lot of guns in this movie, but I really just think you'd be fantastic for this part. And he was kind of like, oh yeah, I think he'd been approached by people that just wanted guns.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I really want you on this film. And then I met him and we really hit it off. And then we made that movie and we had a really great experience, even though that was also kind of bonkers. But we had a great time. And then that film, we were so lucky because that film got into a competition that was run by like Ridley Scott and Michael Fassbender and Emirates and YouTube. It was this big competition called Your Film Festival. And we got taken to like Venice and Dubai. And it was this unbelievably insane trip off the back of, this short film. And as a result of that, Johan, like this great experience on this film, Johan was like, look, I'm putting together this World War I movie. I've conceived of this film. And I was like, a World War I movie? What? And this is in like 2011. And so we did not have even Warhorse, or Warhorse was kind of coming out, but we certainly didn't have like 1917 or like any of these, like now iconic World War. Like it was still kind of like back in even 10 years ago, like setting a movie in World War I was really unheard of.
Yeah,
for
it was
the last couple of
all
years.
World War II stuff.
All World War II, and like apart from, like Paths of Glory and like All Quiet on the Western Front, like, there's obviously really iconic World War I cinema, but for the last, couple of decades, they really hadn't dipped their toe in there. And so he was like, it makes sense. He said, I want to do this movie because I'm an armorer and I'm also, he had access to all the explosives. Like he was also a, pyrotechnician.
Yeah.
So he's like, I got access to a whole bunch of explosives. I got access to a whole bunch of guns. And here's the kicker. He had a friend whose family had a farm in Dubbo, which is about 8 hours drive inland of Sydney. A friend has a farm there, and they've got a particular paddock where the salt table is so high that nothing is growing there anymore, and it just looks like a desolate wasteland. We've got a huge big paddock with a whole bunch of dead plant life, a bunch of guns, a bunch of explosives. It lends itself to doing a movie about trench warfare. And I went, I'm kind of convinced.
Yeah.
I was like, that really makes sense. And so we had, this was over a couple of weeks. We had these conversations, but he's like, look, I'm putting this movie together and I'm writing it and directing it and starring in it. But obviously that's a huge amount of work. Like it was a real passion project for him.
Yeah.
But he's like, it's a huge amount of work. We had a fantastic time working on Scruples, which I also edited. He says, would you consider coming on board as my co-director, co-writer, and the editor of the movie? I said, well, this is, right out of film school. And I was like, absolutely. And things just snowballed from there and it all went ahead. And we shot that movie in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Which is bonkers. And, it was great because we cut the trailer for it while we were still very much cutting it, because it's such an independent production. It was super independent, but at the same time there was like 1,400 visual effects shots in the movie, which is like more than the Fellowship of the Ring. It's like, not that we were doing even remotely the same level, like we're still talking about doing things in After Effects and stuff like that, but it's still a lot of shots, particularly for a post-production team of 2 people. So we were in post on that movie for like a year and a half, but we cut a trailer together and we had a sales agent who took it to all the international markets, and we got pre-sales in that movie from like E1, which is a huge distributor in the United Kingdom. And eventually Lionsgate bought the rights to the US distribution of the movie, which was just, this incredible honor, I guess, in a way, just to be able to have like a name, company like that, attaching the name to the film. And the film came out and it's got a lot of fans, and it's got a lot of great write-ups. We also got a lot of people. I realized this kind of halfway during the movie, but we didn't really say anything. I was like, if there's one group that's probably more fanatical than nerds, it's war buffs. Like in terms of people that are like sticklers for detail. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I was like, you know what? We've really got to be careful, because people are going to pick this apart and make no mistake. We had like historical advisors and technical crew and people that were all there making sure that things got, but we nonetheless, for every good review, we got like a 1-star review from someone going, this guy had the wrong patch on his thing. That wouldn't have come out for 8 more months, and just get, some of these folks that were hardcore war fanatics kind of taking a dig at the movie. But that's totally fine. I get it.
Yeah. And so you're saying that was around 2011, you were saying?
We shot it in 2011, and then it finally got released in 2013.
So that's about the same time you were shooting Brolga, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Because you shot that 2011, so it's 2011, right? About right out of film school for you?
Yeah, I graduated film school in July of 2011. And we actually shot Brolga, a part of the principal photography, right before I finished film school. And then we started rolling on Forbidden Ground in November.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so like, this is a crazy thing to think about. And I understand also as an indie filmmaker myself, seeing those films that like you made so long ago finally start to get legs.
Mm-hmm.
8 to 10 years later is bonkers.
Yeah, well, it's funny, right? Because I shot, as I said, a portion of Brolga. We did not even finish the main principal photography for the film, but we just got a lot of the key stuff that we needed back in 2011. And I never anticipated to have the opportunity with Forbidden Ground to pop up. I was expecting to kind of go out of film school and get a part-time job and hustle like everyone else. And obviously I still have to do that. But getting the opportunity to do that feature was so great, because what happened after Forbidden Ground was, even though I was and completely remain wanting to pursue a career as a writer, director, and an editor, coming out of Forbidden Ground, the thing that really gave the big opportunity I got was that I started getting more feature editing work, because I think a lot of people really responded to how the film had been cut. And, there was this the film in the first act of the movie, there's like a 10-15 minute battle sequence, which as we were editing the movie Forbidden Ground, we were editing the movie and we were editing the battle sequence like concurrently. Like, it's one scene that took as much time to edit as the rest of the movie combined. But I was happy with how that came out, and word kind of got around that I knew what I was doing with cutting. And so after that, I got this consistent opportunity to keep cutting movies. I started working with this producer, Steve Jaggi, filmmaker Steve Jaggi, who's now a great friend of mine, started kind of giving me more editing work, and things snowballed to such an extent that I looked up and suddenly like 5 years had passed, because I'd just been cutting all of these films. And again, as anyone can, any indie filmmaker understands, if an opportunity to work on a feature film comes along, it's like, yes, at a certain, it's a paid job, like, of course. And that just kind of kept happening, and not necessarily, and not all the films that I was working on necessarily 24 karat gold by any stretch of the imagination, but there were also some wonderful, great films that I worked on and had some wonderful experiences. And the whole time, everyone I'm working with knows that I'm not just an editor and that I'm going to be pursuing these other things, but it just so happened that suddenly you wake up one day and it's like, wait a minute, I never even finished that other thing. And so it was only in 2018 that I was like, I've got to get around to finishing that film because there was to finishing Brolga, because there was so much effort and work that had been put into getting it up in the first place. And there's been so many people that had gone above and beyond to do me solids and favors for that thing that it would have been a real insult to not finish it. And, but nevertheless, I loved going back into it. It was a really great experience.
So when you went back into it, like, had you already shot the stuff with like the little girl and with your principal actors? Because like by the time you've made Brolga and it's out, she's an adult at this point, right?
That's right. That's right. And there's so many funny stories that just bounce off that. Like, even though, yeah, we had shot a lot of the stuff with the principal cast, with the exception of Tiani, like some of the other actors, they actually came back to do like pickups and insert shots like 8 years later.
Oh wow,
it's astonishing, and I'm so happy that it doesn't really get noticed. But there are so we shot the movie originally with the Red Epic, but I wasn't able to get a Red camera back to shoot some of the pickups and inserts, and so I just shot it on my iPhone. I just shot it, and don't get me wrong, it was like I got a special rig for the phone, and I was using the Filmic Pro app, and I was going above and beyond, but I didn't have a lens adapter or anything. I was just shooting on like an iPhone X. But luckily, and I was getting inserts of hands and stuff like that, and all sorts of other little things, and cut them in, and it didn't make a difference. Like, rather, no one noticed the difference. It's never come up.
That's incredible. That's awesome that they had it together that well.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about it is that I'm sitting there, just me with my phone, and some of the other little tools, with the actors, with a laptop, with the cut that we have to match to. And I'm like, okay, we've got to try and do our best to match this. And, luckily enough, they worked. And so the combination of those pickups, in conjunction with a bunch of the other material that we shot and obtained to kind of flesh out the world of the movie, gave us everything we needed to kind of get it to the finish line.
Yeah, so like one of those things that you had to do to finish the film was you had to travel to Chernobyl to get your post-apocalyptic world, right?
It's absolutely wild. It wasn't necessarily someday like we woke up and it's like, you know what, let's go to Chernobyl. and this is before the TV show came out. This is in like 2018, admittedly like right before it came out. But what was happening was my partner and executive producer, Jess Stamen, her family is from Ukraine, and she was going to go over there. We were going to go over there to visit some friends and family and to do a bit of a holiday back when the world was, normal.
Back when you could travel.
And, yeah, quite novelty now, right? And so she was like, why don't we go to Chernobyl? And at first I was like, pardon? What? And she goes, it's completely safe. And I was completely adamant. I was like, you're insane. You're out of your mind. She's a bit of a thrill seeker. So I'm like, Jess, this is insane. We can't do that. We're going to risk our life. She's like, what are you talking about? Look, it's completely safe. She showed me all the literature and all the information. And I was like, oh my goodness, I guess it is safe. And then she showed me the kicker, which is all the people going through there with their Geiger counters and measuring the radiation. It's like you get more radiation flying from Australia to Europe just by being in a plane than you do from being in Chernobyl for a day. Than you do from being in Chernobyl for 2 days. So I was like, okay, hell, let's do it. And that actually turned out to be just one of the most incredible experiences of our lives. And, like I said, this is before the show had come out. And to be honest, we weren't really prepared for what that experience was like. And now if you've seen the show or if you know the history of the incident, then, obviously there was an unbelievably tragic loss of life that happened there. And so, once we kind of learned that, and been told about that, it's like, okay, well, we do have to treat this with respect, and we can't just be opportunists and just be like, treating this like willy-nilly, which is an Australian expression for, without concern. And
we've
so
got
the stuff that, okay, great. So the stuff in the movie, it's not, there's nothing in the movie as is. Like, there are certainly shots from Chernobyl in the movie, but there's nothing in there that you'd go, oh yeah, that's totally recognizable. It's really just more kind of moments of stillness and moments of something that has been frozen in time and abandoned, rather than shots of a nuclear reactor or, the Ferris wheel or stuff, something like that.
Yeah, it's more just Chernobyl. Buildings.
just built, and and there's an incredible shot that's in this, it's the second shot of the movie actually, where there's this, which is a shot from Chernobyl, which is this shot of graffiti of this kid that's kind of sticking his tongue out and sticking his hand against his nose. And we were there, and I just was going past, and I said to my partner, I was like, doesn't that look like Donald Trump? Like, it looks incredibly like Donald Trump.
It really does.
Isn't it? And I was like, we've got to get that. We've absolutely got to get that piece. So if there's anything iconic from Chernobyl, if people that have been there, they probably recognize that for sure. But just so we got what I did get a lot of great footage, but a lot of that is just going to be on my hard drive as a memory of that experience rather than something I'm trying to put in the film. But there are a few shots in there that I think work really well and feel of a piece with the rest of the movie.
So I read all the interviews you sent actually of you talking about the film. And so you talk about how much you actually enjoyed going back to it 8 years later with fresh eyes in the edit.
Totally. Yeah. And it was, oh, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. And again, right, because, with that advantage of having frozen all the rushes in time and just put them on a drive and literally shelved the drive. And then I go through an 8 year or 7 or 8 year rigorous process of working as a feature film editor, where I'm learning with in a couple of those instances, I had a mentor and people that were really kind of giving me a great further education in film editing. And so by the time I realized that I've got to come back to this, and the time is now. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. I fired it up, and I looked at the existing edit, and I immediately recognized all the places that it could be improved and trimmed because I'd had all this new experience. And the process after that of recutting the movie was a real joy because I really did have a fresh set of new eyes.
Yeah, that's incredible. I kind of want that for all of my films at this like.
Let me tell you, the same kind of thing happened with a bunch of my other films. And if we could all just put films in a drawer for 10 years and pull them out again, I reckon they'd all be better films.
I mean, I've got one film that we shot probably almost 8 years ago at this point that has never really seen the light of day because it didn't really work in festivals and it never really got any sort of traction. And I've definitely gone back and thought about retooling it and fully re-editing it, and it just never becomes the top priority, but I really want to sit down and give that project the time it deserves.
You should do it, because I was thinking about it a lot, and to be fair, when I had done the first rough cut of the movie back in 2011, it was a 30-minute film, and that's obviously kind of just way too long just for your basic film festival purposes, and it was just way too long for the nature of the movie. But at the time, I thought to myself, that's a pretty good length for the film. And then when I was thinking about coming back to it all these years later, I thought to myself, well, that's way too unwieldy. Why don't you think about, and it seems funny in retrospect, but I said, why don't you try to just look at making it a little 5-minute tone poem with no dialogue, and just have it be shots and photography and just a little mood piece, just so that you can say that it was finished. That was the intention. That was kind of the thing that I said, really look at it from a different perspective. Why don't you go in there with an eye towards really just rethinking this from the ground up?
Yeah.
And that obviously didn't happen. The film is now 16 minutes, but that philosophy of really critically rethink everything you've done. And I literally wrote down every scene and compiled all the rushes and was like, why don't you just try to come up with a bunch of different ways that you could repurpose this footage?
Yeah.
And use it to make something new. And that led me on the path to the final film, which is certainly not 5 minutes, but it's almost half the length of the original cut.
But you really distilled the film down to what was necessary to tell the story.
Exactly. I think so anyway, hopefully.
So I was definitely curious in it with its choices of using black and white and color throughout the film. And then I liked going back because I saw it first, and then I went back into your oeuvre of filmmaking and watched your first film, Monuments, and was like, oh, he's got that black and white again. I see that as kind of a thing that you definitely enjoy. Where does that come from?
It's so interesting, right? I was thinking about that myself the other day, and I looked back and I was like, half my filmography black and white. That was never the intention. Look, I'll tell you the absolute truth. In the case of Monuments, that was a film school project, and being black and white was a mandate. The actual one, it was like, this film has to be in black and white. And it's funny, right? Because I've shown that film to a bunch of other people and my friends and colleagues and some mentors. And a bunch of them came back and go, like, explain the black and white. Like, what was the justification, the artistic reasoning? What was your rationale for that? And I was like, it was a checkbox on the assignment. So there's not much more to it than that. Even though I think in retrospect, it works much better in black and white. It's a nice little, it's a little lyrical piece with no dialogue. It's just a musical little poem with a little self-contained story. If anyone wants to check it out, it's on YouTube. But in the case of Brolga, which, not to spoil too much or, to say too much, is predominantly black and white, but does feature some moments of color. That was actually a gradual process, because originally the film, I didn't have an intention to shoot the film to release the film in black and white. We shot it in color, but I didn't have an intention to release it in black and white. And actually, while we were shooting the movie, the DP, Tim Tregoning, who's a lovely guy, he's a genius, and his feature work, some of the stuff he's been doing since that time is just outstanding. He kind of just leans over to me while we're at the camera. He's like, why don't you do this? Why don't we do this movie in black and white? And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not doing this film in black and white. That's ridiculous. That's gimmicky. It's film schooly. What are you talking about? We're shooting these beautiful, lush, environments. I'm not going to do it in black and white. He's like, you should think about doing it in black and white. And I was like, whatever. And then the more I thought about it, and this is my signature characteristic as a creative person. I usually go, that's ridiculous, and poo-poo the idea, and then walk away and go, it's actually brilliant. And I feel kind of foolish for saying no to it, but I'm going back and tell that person, I think it's great. Let's just try to go ahead, and I'll put my tail between my legs. And I just realized, you know what? The black and white does so much. First of all, just from an aesthetic point of view, I think the film is really handsome. I think he did a really good job with the aesthetic of the movie. And I like the look of the black and white. At the same time, the black and white also kind of helps to give the sense of another world, a kind of alien sense to the world. You really get a sense that it's a different place, and that really helps with the setting and the meaning of the story. And then from a really practical aspect, and this is something I didn't, I have to admit, it didn't become super apparent to me until we were in the editing room. The black and white really helps with production value. Like when you've got someone in any wardrobe, putting it in black and white adds a texture and element to it that allows you to get over the line in some cases. And there was some stuff, thankfully now it doesn't actually really survive into the current cut, but there was just some instances where it was like, oh, okay, this is starting to flirt with potentially looking like a student project, which it was, right? But we don't want it to look like a student project. And there were certain instances where, we might have to lose this, we might have to lose that. But by taking it into the black and white, and then because I was the colorist of the film, by really getting experimental with the color grade and really kind of toying with it and doing stuff with the exposure that doesn't really make sense with the laws of physics, but creates this really interesting aesthetic that I think it all comes together. And it's really been nice that a lot of people have complimented the cinematography of the film, because the crew was not big and poor Tim had to do so much with so little. And there were instances where I could tell he was thinking internally like, oh man, if only I had a real crew, I can actually do something great here. But he never really, he never complained, and he's a lovely, sweet guy. And, he's won a couple of awards for the cinematography in the film, and I'm really happy that he has that.
That's incredible. Cause it is gorgeous. And it is a thing where, like, removing the color, instead of seeing the colors of the scene, you're seeing the textures of a scene.
Exactly.
And it becomes much more interesting.
I agree. And then there are obviously instances in the film where the film does go into color. And that was a process that I experimented in a little bit in the editing room, when I realized that, oh wait, now that we're going black and white, if I do want to use color in certain instances, I can say things with it and not use it as a gimmick and not use it as a distraction, but try to get subtextual or even thematic with some of the uses of color. And I'm also really happy with the way that's turned out. And what's been super interesting about that is that the reaction of the audience response to that has been really interesting, has been very broad. a lot of people have come up and said, I really like how the movie goes into color. I like what you were saying with that. And I usually then don't want to probe any further because I just want to kind of leave them with that interpretation. I was like, great. I'm happy. And then some other people have just come up and they go, I really like when it came into color. It really made me feel nice. I'm like, oh, that's great. I really enjoyed it when that happened. I was like, that's great. And then there were some other people who go, that was really distracting. I didn't like that. I was like, okay, well, that's totally fair. Totally get that.
You all get opinions.
We've all got opinions, and I get that. But there is an intention to it, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
All right, I'll let you leave it that way. That's fine. That's fine. So I do have to ask, just because obviously I live in the U.S. and we have our own incredible race relation problems and systemic racism, and I know that Australia has like a very different set of problems that are similar in their own ways.
If you want to distill it down to a horrific relationship between colonizers and the indigenous population of a country, it's really principally the same thing. You know what I mean? Like yes, it's a completely unique historical circumstances, but basically, there's a long way to go to have a proper relationship and to demonstrate proper respect for the Aboriginal cultures of this country, who have just, ever since Europeans arrived here, have just been mistreated and abused and disrespected. And obviously things have improved as we've gone along and grown as a culture, and people have woken up to those injustices, but those injustices are still very much with us here as they are there.
I mean, I hope we even get to, as people wake up and start improving things. I don't know if we're necessarily even getting there yet. We're just like, there's a bunch of injustices and some of us know and some people don't.
That's right. And, you have to do what you can to raise awareness and to stand up and be an ally where you can. But yeah, it's, suffice it to say that, no, it's not in a good place. And the non-Indigenous population of this country needs to do better, basically.
Yeah.
That's the,
and so then I have to ask, as a non-Indigenous person yourself, like, where did this story come from for you? And then what was it like deciding that this is a story you were going to tell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a key part of the conversation about the film, right? And it's kind of woven into the texture of what the film's all about. The idea for it has been percolating in my mind for, ever since I was a kid, ever since I was in school. And, I was lucky when I was being brought up and raised and educated that we did have an honestness and an openness about, the tragedies that happened to the Indigenous population of this country. And we were educated about that when we were children. And that always stuck with me as a profound sense of injustice. And as someone who, wanted to pay respect and learn more about the Indigenous culture of this country, I started doing a lot of research and a lot of reading and really an interest in kind of art and storytelling, which is a huge part of the Aboriginal cultures of this country. And this idea kind of percolated. I was thinking to myself, I really want to do a movie which has kind of got this reconciliatory message, a message about kind of coming together, because obviously the most important thought is that, we're all human beings and all have to come together, if we're going to survive as a species, if we're going to survive and help this planet, we have to come together as a team. And so I always wanted to kind of tell a story about that, about Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples coming together and learning and listening. And I wanted to set it in a kind of science fiction setting, in a future setting, so that it could be a little bit more allegorical, and so that I would have an avenue and a means of telling it. Because if you're going to tell a story about contemporary Aboriginal life, then you get an Aboriginal storyteller, Aboriginal filmmaker will tell you that this is not really that. This is kind of more of a metaphor. It's kind of a poem thing, and it's about these two groups coming together. And so that idea had been kind of percolating for a while, and then I found the work of this Australian artist, Michael Connolly, who's Aboriginal artist, and I just come across his work as I was doing research. And I came across the story of the Brolga crane, which is something which is featured in the film, and is incorporated as an element of it. And I realized that this was kind of this would kind of be a way in to raising this idea. So I got in touch with Michael, and I kind of explained to him what my thoughts were and just kind of what my idea was, and how I wanted to collaborate with him and to bring him on board and to use his paintings and his stories and the stories of his people, the Murawari clan, to help to tell this story about healing and about people learning to live together and to see the positives in each other. And it's a really kind of the message of the film is really positive ultimately. And I said to him, like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about collaborating on this with me? Would this be okay? And I was very open about just wanting to kind of get a bit of guidance and get his opinion and for him to steer me in this. And he was so super collaborative and super supportive and really got the idea. And he really understood it to be, the Aboriginal component of the story, is really designed to spread that voice and to spread those stories and that artwork directly from the source. It's about really appreciating that culture. From my point of view, it's the whole treatise of the film is basically for non-Indigenous audiences to sit and listen to that part of our society and to learn from them, which is something that is echoed in the events of the film. And so working with Michael was so fantastic, and he was just so super supportive and brought so much to it in our kind of wonderful conversations. And we did have a bunch of other wonderful kind of collaborators and consultants, Indigenous creatives who were kind of discussing the film with us and who we would need to speak to in order to pursue this. But really, once Michael came on board, he says, "Look, you've got my permission, my blessing to use my works, and I have more than enough right to say that. So go ahead and do this." And I was that was the best part of the process. Even before we shot a frame of footage, like having him want to work in that. And I said to him, "Look, I'm not doing this for any money. I don't want to make a dime of profit off this film ever. It's not for that." But I also said to him, like, what would it take for me to be able to use your art and to incorporate it? What would you like? And he gave it to me completely for free, just so that it would be out there and so that it could be incorporated. And then when James Saunders, who's the lead actor of the film, came on board and joined the project, he also had questions. Like, even in the audition, he's like, "Okay, so you're obviously not an Indigenous filmmaker. There's a Dreamtime story. The Dreamtime being the name for the Aboriginal Australian mythology and kind of spirituality. Do you have permission to use this? This can be very touchy if you don't have the right permission."
I saw the interview where he talked about that, and I was like, yeah, I'm sure walking in as a Aboriginal person having that concern, be like, "I don't think you look like the person that can tell this story." Like,
yeah, exactly. And that's why I wanted to emphasize to him that, again, you've got this, apart from the fact that Michael had been like, "Yes, I love this, let's go for this," I really wanted to make it clear to him what my intention for it was. And so there's that allegorical sense, it's not in our world, it's in a different reality.
Yeah.
And the film is about addressing the very thing that we're talking about when it comes to appropriate, like what is appropriate. It is about a non-Indigenous perspective going, wow, I need to really take a look at what this is. And I should stop acting in my own self-interest and I should actually start to pay attention to what's really important and start to work towards preserving and helping to preserve and to echo the voices of people that, have been living here for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. So what is it like now at this point to feel like this film that you made 8 years ago, pretty much, and like obviously you then kind of remade a couple of years ago,
in a way, yeah,
is now getting all of this traction and has gotten all of this accolade and acknowledgement? Like, how does that feel as a filmmaker?
It's been really lovely and really rewarding, frankly. And again, it's really not, I didn't expect or want to walk away from releasing this film again, getting a whole bunch of kudos or anything. I wasn't really interested in doing that. This has really been, like I said, like a lifelong I'm going to go with a cliched thing. Like it's like a lifelong artistic dream of wanting to do this story and to tell something like this, but also to collaborate with someone and to have an opportunity to bring this idea to people, or to reiterate this idea to people, with a team of creatives and artists who are on board with it. And so the best reaction to it has just been people going, that movie was really sweet. I really responded to the message. Thanks for making it. And so people, I guess, getting the movie is the best reaction you can have. And so and people have been very complimentary towards the directing and all the artists, all the craft and everything like that. And I'm really happy that, again, Matt, the composer, and Tim, the cinematographer, and Trackdown Studios that did the sound, like they get, great kudos, and Tiani and James, the other James Shepard, the actor who plays the bad guy, are also wonderful. But for me, the best thing about the movie is just that people enjoy it, they get the message, and then conversations like the one we're having right now get to spring up out of that. And the key takeaway is, enabling Indigenous voices and not trampling over them and not co-opting what they have to say for our own purposes, but really just kind of shutting up.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And so when did you release this film, and when was it at festivals?
So the film festival premiere was in September of 2019.
Okay.
At the Sydney Sci-Fi Film Festival, it was in front of a movie called Necrotronic, which was a fun and awesome kind of gore splatter sci-fi film. I don't know if you.
That doesn't fit with that at all.
It does not fit with that at all. But it was that was a good counter programming kind of pastiche for that. But that was from that film was made by the same guys that made the movie Wormwood, which was a super kind of successful indie Australian kind of zombie action movie. And so there was a big built-in fan base for that. So it was great to have. Basically, we got a packed cinema in the biggest cinema in Sydney.
That's awesome.
To go to that movie. And then we were, the ones that were paired, the short film paired before it. So we got a huge audience for that. And so we were lucky. That was a really great way to premiere the film. And then after that, we had a whole bunch of months traveling to film festivals. I actually traveled over to LA to screen the film at a couple of festivals, and it screened all over the world and all sorts of great events. But then obviously at a certain stage, the pandemic meant that a lot of film festivals started to go virtual.
Yeah.
And so we were like, what's that going to be like? What's that going to mean? And it was really kind of a split bag, because the film got into lots and lots of great festivals. And some of those festivals, when they transitioned to virtual, really did a great job and kicked it out of the park. And, there was great conversation and dialogue happening about it and great support, and they were pushing it. And a bunch of those were great. Like we screened in the Miami Science Fiction Film Festival, and they were fantastic and super enthusiastic and pushing it. But some of the other festivals, I think they had no idea how to react, and they made a go of it, but it didn't really spark. But at the end of the day, the film had a wonderful festival life, and it was honored with a bunch of awards that I'm, especially awards for acting and the cinematography and stuff like that, have been super rewarding. And now the film is online. Last night, it's been online for like a month now, and last night we crossed 5,000 views, which in the grand scheme of the universe is nothing. But for this little passion project of mine that's been in the back of my brain for a few years, to be able to put it online, people to watch it, to have a great reaction, to talk to folks like you about it, and have a great time kind of touching on these issues, is really rewarding, and it's delightful.
Yeah, I mean, I think my wife always reminds me about views is whenever I'm like, it's just like a couple hundred or whatever. She always goes, if you had a couple hundred people in a room watching it, you'd be really happy. And I go, fuck,
that's
you're right.
That's exactly my thoughts. Totally my thoughts. I was just thinking to myself, like, imagine if you had 300 people just sitting in the cinema. You'd be like, that was great. We had a great, even if you had like a one night roadshow thing, you'd be like, yeah, we had packed house, 300 people.
Yeah.
So, I actually totally agree. And, I'm lucky at the moment to be working on a whole bunch of projects now moving forward, and there's some awesome stuff on the horizon. But at the same time, by virtue of some of the limitations imposed on us by COVID, I've just started to kind of do like YouTube content, just like 2-camera content.
I watched your Wonder Woman video.
Thank you very much.
I really
And
enjoyed it.
thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. I had no, I was more nervous about putting that out than probably any other film in my career because I'm like, I could really embarrass myself with this. But people really seem to like it, and that's an instance where I only put that online a couple of days ago, and that's had like 200 views or whatever. Again, compared to anything else in the universe, that's really nothing, but I don't care. That's 200 people that literally sat down and listened to me ramble about Wonder Woman 84 for like 9 minutes.
I mean,
thanks, guys.
like so that was like one of the last things I watched of yours. And before that, I was like, oh man, this guy's a good filmmaker. That's cool. I'm excited to talk to him. And then I watched that and I was like, this guy's a cool guy. I'm like nervous now. Like, I like this
Thanks,
dude.
man. That's really nice. That's really nice. Thanks, dude.
Yeah. And
hopefully you're not nervous now because I'm,
no.
very easy to talk to.
But like I was like looking at your book selections on your bookshelves, I was like, I got those books. That's cool. Like,
oh, for sure, right?
Yeah, like you've got Dune up there. You've got
absolutely
some Ayn Rand up there.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? I did that video, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if we're going to have anyone ask me about the Ayn Rand book. and someone sent me a DM going like, I'm not sure about it. And I'm like, you know what? I think you got to read everything, right? You got to expand your horizons. You got to dip your toe in everything. I'm not saying I'm a Randian objectivist or anything like that. I just think you need to be read to a certain degree. So.
I mean, I haven't read it yet, but I just about actually now a year and a half ago at this point bought Atlas Shrugged, and it's been sitting there, and I'm like, someday.
That is the Fountainhead.
Yeah.
So maybe if we read them, we can swap.
Oh, perfect. That'd be great. What's crazy is Brad Pitt says The Fountainhead is his favorite movie. I mean, his favorite book.
And a whole bunch of people have said that. Zack Snyder has said that. A whole bunch of folks. And I read it, and I understand why. I mean, I've read it, and I had a conversation with someone about it because I went to myself, I don't think it's that bad. And they go, look, it's really Atlas Shrugged, where she goes completely off the rails compared to Atlas Shrugged. The Fountainhead is a pretty good book, and I read it, and it's like, I get why artists like it, because it's basically all about sticking true to your vision and not letting people who don't get what you're trying to do constrict what you're trying to do, and it's just about meeting your potential and believing yourself and not giving up on yourself. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of other subtext that's like kind of murky and weird, but if you read it from a certain lens, it's like, I get it. This is kind of a can-do thing. And then you read Atlas Shrugged and it's like, oh boy. But I get why people like it.
Yeah, no. And then you've got all those comic books. I noticed V for Vendetta, Dark Knight. Like, yep. I was like, dude, like, and I'll be so honest. I really loved the fact that you were just able to be like, I loved Wonder Woman 84 and just be all
loved it.
Because like, I thought it was really enjoyable too. Like, it's a fun movie, and that's what it's supposed to be.
Movie.
It's based on a bunch of comic books.
I didn't. And here's the thing, I live and breathe DC comics, right? Like I love DC. I love Marvel comics as well, but I'm a DC guy, and I have really kind of been into a lot of these, like, unpopular opinion. Like, I really like the work of Zack Snyder, so I really love like those are kind of a certain palette, and it's questionable as to whether those films should have been the spearhead of the brand, because they're certainly not like bringing little kids on board to the thing. It's kind of like, oh, maybe those should be like an Elseworlds thing. Maybe Zack Snyder's films should be on streaming, which is where it's going now. But when they did Aquaman, and I was like, great, fun, just fun, zany antics that a kid can watch and have. I went and saw Wonder Woman 84, and like, I cried like 4 or 5 times in that movie, and I'm not a putz. I'm crying because I'm like, great, I can just have a little bit of fun with a fun popcorn movie, and it's moving, and it's not just a waste of my time.
So did you get to see it in theaters?
Yeah, I really liked it. I did.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
And I really feel for you, brother, because that's a hard time. It's I feel so bad for the exhibitors. I mean, like, make no mistake, it's still a really tough time for theaters here, because I don't know how much you or your listeners know this, but generally speaking, like, culturally, Australia, we get like everything from the US. Like we do, obviously we have our own stuff and we have our own television, we have our own movies and, you know, everything in culture, but we also are a huge adopter of American culture and American pop culture, right? So there's only a certain amount of Australian films that even get made. Most of our cinemas show American or, you know, English or, you know, other foreign movies, but mainly like American blockbusters. Like your average Australian multiplex cinema is going to be identical to a multiplex cinema in any major city in the US, right? So what that means is there's not a lot of movies showing. There's really not a lot of content coming in because our cinemas depend on US movies, US blockbusters. And so all of our theater goers, bless their hearts, especially the indie film, you know, there's a couple of cinemas throughout this, just the city of Sydney that are, you know, independent owned cinemas that still play all your big movies and all your kind of low budget movies as well. And they're, you know, really having, you know, like they're putting on all these classic films and constantly putting on like the repertory cinema, like having, you know, like this, the David Lynch marathon, we're doing the David Fincher marathon, we're putting all the Star Wars movies on, we're putting all the Indiana Jones movies on. And that's great. And a lot of us are trying to go to those and keep it going because we're like, yes, at least we can go to the movies. Cinemas for us reopened relatively quickly compared to, you know, you guys. Like we all went and saw Tenet in the cinema. And you want to go and you want to support them, but at a certain point, the film going public's like, well, I'm just going to watch The Empire Strikes Back on Blu-ray. I'm not going to go out to the movies. The good news to that is that there's a new Australian film right now called The Dry, which has got Eric Bana as the lead, which is kind of a it's set in a kind of a rural Australian town. It's kind of like a drama thriller investigatory thing. I must confess I haven't yet seen it yet, but I will. And I'm going to go out and see it ASAP because it's an Australian movie that right now, just by virtue of where it kind of came on the calendar, it's cleaning up. Like this sounds like absolutely nothing, but to the Australian box office, that's a homegrown Australian movie that's made $10 million at the Australian box office. Now that sounds, you know, that is literally nothing to a lot of movies coming from the US. For an Australian homegrown film to make $10 million at the box office is like, oh my God, the industry's been saved, you know, like it's a huge deal. And I'm really happy about that. And that's a nice blip on the horizon, on the landscape right now. But even though cinemas are open, it's still kind of tough.
I mean, our cinemas are open, and I've got a friend he owns and operates an indie cinema in Kansas City. And I don't feel safe enough yet when you hear where the numbers are in America and the death rate in America. And I don't want to get myself sick or anybody I love sick. So I just don't go. And I feel so bad about that. Cause like, I know he's struggling, but like, I've got to be safe. And so but like seeing a movie is where I live. Like
it's going to church, right? Like,
yes.
You know, it's wild. I really feel for your friend there. And I hope, you know, hopefully things are going to be able to pick up soon. Thankfully we've got some traction. But yeah, I feel so sorry for it. Obviously of course it goes without saying, you're making the right call. You got to, that's the call you got to make. You've got to, you can't. And you know, my sister, she lives in New Jersey with my brother-in-law.
Oh God.
They moved to New Jersey like 6 months before the outbreak.
Oh God.
And you know, so what an introduction to living in the US that has been. And so they've just been living in their little apartment there in Jersey City for, you know, God knows how long.
Oh my God.
You know, they don't remember what it even feel. They're like, if we went to a cinema now, it would feel really strange. You know, like we'd feel really unsafe. And I get it. And but that is so sad, right? Like, it's so sad that that's the sentiment.
But like,
I guess there's a lot of other people with bigger problems.
And I've got like a lot of people that are like, well, will movie theaters still exist? I'm like, of course they will, because all of you that are stuck in your homes, including myself, are just like going crazy wanting to go to the movies. Like,
absolutely. And it's like I've said, I've been saying this all throughout this pandemic when this question has come up. It's like, a movie is going to survive. And it's like, guys, never underestimate the human desire to want to leave the house to watch TV. Like we all just want to watch TV, but we also want to think to ourselves, hey, you went out and did something. That's why we go to the movies. It's like, hey, I don't really want to have to engage, or I just want to go watch TV, but let's do it outside with a bunch of other people and maybe have a drink. And people are going to not stop wanting to watch TV and go out. It's just not going to happen. So movies are going to be fine, guys.
I love that view so much, and you're so right. I've been like all like highfalutin, like people always will want the like experience of feeling a story together with a group. But no, you're right. It's people want to watch TV bigger and feel like they left their house.
And feel like they did something with their day. And thank God. That's why the movies have been continued to be successful through television, through video games, through everything. It's like, if we go out, at least we're doing something, right? Mark my words, movies are going to be just fine.
Oh man, you just you totally blew apart my like highfalutin theory, and just you're so right. Oh my goodness. Cool. So you're now working on the YouTube channel because obviously you have less work than you did before, I'm sure.
Well, it's a funny thing, right? I mean, the YouTube channel again. My YouTube channel is predominantly where I put my dramatic content and the short films and stuff that I work on, and I'm going to be hopefully doing a bunch of other great stuff. Like I'm going to be putting up, we recorded a commentary track for Forbidden Ground, / Battleground, but it was only ever made available for the US release.
Okay,
and so I want to kind of maybe see about putting that on there so that we can have it's an Australian film, so maybe Australian audiences can hear the commentary. That'd be nice. But I'm still going to
go find a DVD of this movie. I'm going to do it.
I hope you can. I think you still can. Look, the main way to watch it is it's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it. You can just it's easily found.
But I want to.
Wait, no, hang on. In the US, where is it?
It's on Prime.
No. I think it's on Prime.
It is. Yeah. I shouldn't have time. I'm sorry. I would have watched it.
No. Look, and to be honest, I Battleground is a great experience, and I love that movie. But it's not going to change your life.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
Nope.
I now want to own it though, so I have the commentary. Like
I appreciate that. And even the recording the commentary was some technical glitches in that made that quite an experience. But with my YouTube channel, like I'm probably going to continue to do a bunch of other 2-camera content. But again, it's not really about kind of driving viewership for those things. Because I prefer to kind of classify the films I make as the content. But in the case of maybe doing some more 2-camera stuff, like you said with the Wonder Woman thing, sometimes I just want to get on camera and just say to people, guys, I love this movie, and I think all of you people that don't like it are nuts.
Yeah.
Or at the same time, there are people that come to me and go, what do you think of this movie? And maybe I'm just sick of talking about that movie. Or more often than not, they'll go, this movie sucked, and they'll want to go and have a go at the movie. And I'll do that sometimes, but generally speaking, now I can be like, you know what? Just watch the video.
Yeah.
Everything I want to say is in the video, and now we can talk about something else. Is that cool?
I mean, that's kind of because we can't do as much filmmaking, and me and my wife are filmmakers. I've focused a lot more on Indies on Indie, this podcast, and we've started just a podcast between me and my wife called First Timers Movie Club.
I saw.
Where awesome, thank you. And I'm loving doing that, and I was telling somebody about it, and they were like, well, so what did you think of Gone with the Wind? I was like, fucking listen to the episode. Like, I said it all.
Oh, there, dude.
Like, yeah, you can go listen. I'm very nice, but I don't like it. Like,
yeah, I'm just like, oh, yeah, okay. Like, we do not have time for this. Go listen to the app. Come back to me.
Exactly.
I feel you.
Oh man. That's great. I'm glad that you're still doing stuff though, that you've got stuff going on in Australia. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, it comes back to that bigger, it's impossible not to avoid the COVID thing, right? I mean, but I was super lucky. It's actually funny that we should be talking today because today marks the wrap on Dive Club, which is the new Netflix series that I was really lucky enough to be involved in as a writer. Me and my writing partner, Kaya Bradshaw, and we wrote 4 episodes of this show, which is it's actually a collaboration between Netflix and Channel 10, which is one of the main TV networks here in Australia. So it's actually going to be released on Channel 10 in Australia, but it'll be on Netflix everywhere else in the world.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful thing to work on. And that was, That's being produced by Steve Jaggi, who again brought me on as an editor on a whole bunch of films throughout my career. But like I said, knows, he knows that I also was writing and directing, and he was like, well, I think we can bring you onto this. And we've actually written a bunch of other screenplays for him, and that are in kind of various stages of development, but looks like they'll be happening once we can, do things like Return to America. Films, like films that are set in America now, we have to kind of bench, because it's like, oh, well, you can only double, Brisbane as New York City for so long, or, San Francisco for so long, or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's a production that they literally wrapped shooting today, and that's going to be coming out sometime this year, and that's going to be so exciting. That's a 12-part series, which is going to be really great.
That's awesome. I mean, I could talk to you for forever, but I'll try not to. How did you start working with your writing partner?
Kyra and I, it's a really lovely story. She actually hired me to work in, in EB Games, which is GameStop, same company.
Yeah.
She was the assistant manager of an EB Games. This is back in like 2006. And I had, she was the assistant manager of the local store. And so all of us, gamers, we're familiar with the staff because we're constantly going in there all the time. And at some point I was like, well, I'm going to, I need to get a job. I'd finished university for the year, and I was like, I need to get a job. So I'll just go and apply there. And, long story short, I had the interview with Kyra, and we got along really well, and she gave me the job, and we became great friends and colleagues. And then eventually she left the store, and I replaced her in her role. And then we kind of dropped out of contact for about 5 years. And then, no joke, after all that time, we happened to be out the front of that store for no reason whatsoever. And we passed each other, and we went, what? How could it be possible that we're bumping into each other and out the front of this place that we both worked at? And that's how we first met. Super spooky. And that's when we was like, we've got to stay in touch. So we exchanged phone numbers, and then became really, really close friends, and steadily kind of became best friends, kind of where we are to this day. And, but one of the great things that united us and was part of our shared friendship was shared huge love and adoration for movies. And Kara's the same. She's completely grown up on movies, literally just completely obsessed with movies. And she actually works in distribution. She works, she's worked for a bunch of companies. So she used to work for Icon, which is Mel Gibson's company here. And now she works for Village Roadshow, which is, big, production and distributor company here. But at some point about, 3 or 4 years ago, I just said, Kyra, we've got to start collaborating together. We've got to start writing stuff together, because we'd spent all this time talking about films and discussing podcasts and all this kind of stuff, and going to the movies and spending 3 hours after the movie discussing the movie and talking about what we would have done differently, etc. It's like, we've got to just put the pedal to the metal, and you got to start working with me on stuff. And so we did. And we started collaborating, and then we started working on a few projects with Steve and a few other scripts. And I can't really talk about those because they're still kind of in development and in a kind of state of stasis while we figure out what's going on. But we had a really great experience doing that. And so as a result of that, we'd really kind of proven ourselves as writers. And so he says, well, I'm putting together this TV show, which is the biggest thing that I'll be working on, this Netflix collab thing. And we'd like you guys to write some of the episodes. And we, almost had a heart attack. Couldn't believe it, but it was a really, really great experience. And, it was great to be in a writer's, it was a virtual writer's room, but it was great to be in a virtual Netflix writer's room with some of the folks from LA checking in and collaborating with us. And
so was that all during this pandemic that you were?
All during the pandemic.
Oh,
this is
God.
like from June to like August, October last year, with me and Kyra here in Sydney, but in, me here and her in her apartment, then another writer in Melbourne, and then the rest of the team in Brisbane. So it was a trans-city Zoom writer's room, which would, sometimes be, like 12 hours a day, breaking these stories and figuring them out and then assigning them to writers and stuff. But, working with Kyra and also with Claire and Drew and Georgia, who's the head writer on the show. It's really kind of Georgia's baby. She's the one who's kind of the main overseer and kind of keeps us all in line and is the final arbiter of stuff. But we had a wonderful time on that, and we just can't wait for it to come out.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much
It's
for
real
talking to me.
fun.
I've got two more questions for you.
Please.
They're the last two I end with the podcast with. And the first one is, I like to ask, because everyone I talk to is artists, I like to ask you what you're like watching, reading. You said you're a gamer, what you're playing. I like to know what art that you're taking in, because I
cool.
think that we always have interesting perspectives, and we always find sometimes it's all everyone goes, oh, The Mandalorian, which is true. Everyone's watching it. It's great. But like,
except me.
Oh, wow.
I actually have not gotten around to watching The Mandalorian. And, you know, in many ways, and like, make no mistake, like, you know, I when I do things like this, I always want to like try to be less of a cliche this time. Like, don't say that, just don't say that you got into movies because of Star Wars. But obviously, like, I got into movies because of Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
And so, like,
Yeah.
you know, like, it's obviously, and I'm completely obsessed with it and always have been. But you know, those sequel movies burn me so bad, dude. Even though I love, like, I see you got a Last Jedi shirt on.
I do.
And I think The Last Jedi is a great movie. Like, don't get me wrong. I really think The Last Jedi is a beautiful film. And I think everything in it was so masterfully done. But overall, that sequel trilogy was just so poorly conceived that I just need a break from Star Wars for a while. Like that, I went and saw all the prequels at their midnight premieres, and then I went and saw all the sequels at their midnight premieres. And let me tell you something. Like, when I went to that I went to the Rise of Skywalker with my buddy, but when we came out of that movie, it was like, I'm just going to go home, eh? Like, it was, so I'm going to get around, you know, obviously through cultural osmosis, I know everything about The Mandalorian, and I've seen the end of you know, if you're on social media, you cannot skip what happened at the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian. So, you know, I'll get around to it later, but right now, I'll answer your question first by talking about what I'm reading.
Okay.
Which is, I'm going to go get it for you. Hang on. Oh, I guess it's not a visual podcast. So, what I'm reading is the Star Wars. Is it the archives? It's the recently released like beautiful big coffee book about the making of the prequels.
Oh, wow.
Which I just love because those movies are so hated and there's so much wrong with them. And, you know, they're just such failures, but I just love them because I grew up with them. And to be fair, I'm one of those people that's in the corner of like, guys, who cares? George created digital filmmaking, and he lit that baton and passed it. He's like, who cares about these films? Just go and make. He's always been honest about like, I'm just doing this so that we can further the tech so that more people can make cooler films. And that's 100% correct. And furthermore, like this is a deep cut for the nerds, but like, you know, the documentary, The Beginning, which is on the DVD for The Phantom Menace, which is just this fly on the wall documentary about the making of the movie. I watched that when I was 12 and I was like, this is so much more incredible than the movie. Like watching them make this movie. And I think that was one of the huge things that made me interested in the process. So I'm reading this beautiful book that's all about not only the prequels, but it's all about the making of the Star Wars special editions. It's like a big book of everything people hate about Star Wars.
What's it called?
And it's called, I'm going to get it just so you can see it.
Yeah. That thing's huge.
So it's just unbelievable. It's the Star Wars Archives by Paul Duncan. It's a Taschen book. And it's just this giant, it's just, you know, there's marked up script pages, there's concept art.
Well, I know what I have to buy now.
It's like $300, but let me tell you, it was worth it. This was my Christmas present from my girlfriend. She was like, what do you want? I'm like, this? She's like, you're such a nerd. And I was like, thanks, babe. And it's just beautiful. So that's what I'm reading. And it's great. And what I'm watching at the moment, I mean, like I'm trying to watch like a new movie every day. Doesn't always happen. Yeah. Doesn't always happen. But you can't see it here, but I've got like 18,000. I'm a big believer in physical media. So I've got like 18,000 Blu-rays over there. And so it's like, great. What am I going to watch today? Here's something I bought in 2007. You know, it's still in the shrink wrap.
You're a man after my own heart. That's exactly my life.
Physical media, dude.
Yep.
Absolutely. So like, you know, 4Ks, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that I am just about to start watching this evening with my partner, Jess, is something I've been looking forward to it for a long time, which is Twin Peaks: The Return, the third season of Twin Peaks, which I have never seen. I'm a huge David Lynch fan. I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan. But my partner Jess had never, I keep calling my partner Jess, Jess had never seen any of Twin Peaks, any of it. And so I was like, great, I'm going to go out and buy the giant box set that's got everything that's ever been possibly committed to film about Twin Peaks. And so we watched the first 2 seasons, and then we watched, the movie, and then we watched the missing pieces, which is the deleted scenes of Firework with me cut into a feature-length presentation. And I was like, great, let's go. And she's like, you know what? Let's just take a couple of days off from Twin Peaks because that was really disturbing. And I was like, you got it. But that's kind of what we're going to be getting into tonight. So I'm super excited about that.
David Lynch is one of those that I have never, I need to deep dive into it, but I just haven't done it.
I get it. And a lot of people haven't. And a lot of people, when they do, they go, what the because his movies are super weird. If anyone out there is thinking about diving into the David Lynch filmography, just remember that it's a dream. That's all. When you're watching his movies, it's not meant to be real. It's in a dream state. Just think of it as dream logic, and then I think you'll get it. But again, back to the thing about the cinemas and the problems of the cinemas. Like we had the Randwick Ritz, one of our local cinemas, did a David Lynch marathon where all of his films were on the big screen, one every week, and that was packed out. I was like, yay! Look, packed out with masks, etc., etc. But I love his films a lot, and I'm looking forward to finishing that. And then in terms of what when I'm playing, I'm actually playing the Remedy game Control, which is, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's made by Remedy Games, who are the guys that did Max Payne and Quantum Break and stuff like that. And I'm playing it on PC, but it's on PS4 and whatnot. And that's absolutely fantastic. It's an incredible game. And I think Remedy Studios are just one of the best consistent video game developers out there. They're incredible. Finnish company. Big fan.
All right. Well, I don't play enough games. I really need to. And right now, because of the pandemic and the lack of freelance art that I can do, I'm actually working at a video game and a movie and game store. And so that's been a blast. But every time I'm there, I'm like, man, there are a lot of video games that I should have played and just haven't.
Dude, I'm the same. And I only got back into playing this. I took maybe a 6-month break of just because I was just I just don't have the mental wherewithal to commit to this right now. I had to just doing a bunch of other stuff, but I've kind of gotten back into it now. And I was like, oh, great. I love this art form. And it's so great. And it's so different because sometimes when you're working in film and dealing with film and thinking about film, in your recreation, you want to do something different. And video games are such a great way of doing that because you're getting a narrative experience or just a cathartic, kinesthetic one. But for me, I like video games that have stories and character. And so when you can do that, and it just uses a different part of your brain from movies, and I've got to remember to kind of keep that up to keep myself charged.
That's why I dropped out of being a gamer, if we quote unquote it, is because I really started focusing on the filmmaking, and then it just didn't have time to have hobbies anymore because it is all consuming at times.
Yeah, me too. I'm exactly the same. There are whole periods there where I'll take whole huge chunks of time where I just don't do it, whether I'm too busy or I just don't feel compelled to do it because the film is totally eating up my life. But it is good. And thankfully games have allowed people to stay sane in these times, right?
Oh, so definitely.
Whatever help keeps you on the level.
Working at a video game store right now, I see people just they need it, and we are selling games like crazy because they just need to be able to escape.
Totally.
All right. I guess we're to the last question.
Hit me.
And that is, if you could either go back in time and give early filmmaking you a piece of advice, or someone else who is looking for a similar career trajectory that you have had a piece of advice, what would you tell that person / yourself?
Oh, that's a super good question. That is a super good question. Would I ask myself something? Well, it's got to be something I would tell myself, right? Look, I guess from that point of view, I wouldn't want to go back and do anything that disrupts the timeline because I'm kind of happy with how things are playing out. I don't want to go back and butterfly effect myself. But just a general piece of advice, I guess I would give is It's got to be, if you're going to keep it a broad thing, not just about one tract or style of filmmaking, it's got to be you've got to just watch and read about movies constantly. That was one of the things that I was at film school that did kind of confuse me and surprised me, is that the people that were there, the few people that were there that were like, I haven't watched this, I haven't done that. They want to get involved in film, but they don't live and breathe film. Which is a non sequitur to me, because as you well know, if you don't live and breathe film, this is a miserable career. It's a business that will drive you to insanity and depression, unless you're completely in love with it, and even then, it will still do those things sometimes. But in order to kind of thrive and prosper, you've got to live and breathe movies and be able to you've got to speak the language, right? You've got to understand the nature of shot dynamics and what does coverage mean, and how do you use the camera to tell a story, and how do you convey pathos, and how do you do a character arc. I mean, all you got to do to get the fundamental principles of those things is to just watch movies. But I guess, to tie it all the way back to our kind of first point, I guess in a way, maybe if I was going to give a simpler, less rambly answer, I'd probably say go to film school, because that was said to me and that was what was set me off. And so I probably want to pay it forward. And I have done that. I have said to people who I can see have got that itch, go to film school. And, again, I don't think that's necessarily the only way to become a filmmaker. It's certainly not. We know that it's not. Chris Nolan didn't go to film school. So it's not like it's the only way to go forward. But I think sometimes if you're wondering whether or not it's for you, at least go and take a look, and you'll either be inspired and go, of course, absolutely it is, or you'll go, maybe not, because you can't do it by halves.
Yeah, definitely. I like what you're saying though about like living in like film, like reading and watching, especially because like I've been at film festivals where a filmmaker has been like, oh, I don't watch films. I'm like, what are you doing here? Yeah.
Like, and to be fair, I guess there are a couple of filmmakers out there. Like, I guess maybe David Lynch is one of them. He's spoken to the fact he's like, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of films, but he's doing borderline art house, abstract, impressionistic, surrealistic cinema, which is kind of his own jam. It's not conventional filmmaking. That's cool. If you're gonna be in the main game, speaking the language and having a go, you've just got to watch movies to know what the tastes are, what the contemporary vibes are. I mean, even watch a movie now from 2005. It's like, oh my God, like it feels like a movie from 2005, right?
Yeah.
You can totally tell when that movie came from. Watch a movie from 2010. You're like, man, this feels dated already.
I mean, that was like the weird thing I loved about the Tom Hardy Venom film is I was like, it feels like a 2008 movie. Like,
that is the single best way to describe that film. It's like, wow, this is from the before time.
It was like, oh, this feels like a movie I watched when I was like in middle school to high school, and I was like, 100%. Oh, it's kind of dark, it's actiony. I like this. Like,
is Ben Affleck's Daredevil going to cameo in the next one? Like, it's just,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, 100%. I agree. And look, to close it off, like again, bring it back to Wonder Woman 84. That's why I was just like, wow, this is like a nice. It's just an excuse to just be like, yay, a comic book movie again that I can be like, that's right, kid. It's a bunch of fun.
Yeah.
That's what I want sometimes, guys.
Exactly. Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this, for being on the podcast. Thank you
so much, Patrick. It's been so nice chatting to you.
I hope you have a good day, because I guess your day's about to start. Have a good day.
That's right. I got to get on another call.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patrick. All the very best.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
All right, there you go. Go watch Brolga right now. It's on YouTube. So are all of his other films besides the feature we talked about. All the shorts we talk about, they're all on his YouTube channel. Go watch that. Go watch the video where he talks about Wonder Woman. It's really fun. So do all of that. Also, did you hear how many times I said cinema? I said cinema a lot. Maybe I'll start saying cinema. Let's all bring that over here to the States. And man, I just miss seeing movies in theaters. Don't you miss seeing movies in theaters? So go out there, be safe, be kind to everybody, subscribe to this podcast, do all those things, the like, review, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends. All right. Till next time. Love you.